Hello, my name is Bubzia, and today I want to talk about 10 different techniques that I frequently use in my blindfolded speedruns. I often get questions about what techniques and strategies I use for my runs, and while many people have heard names like beat counting, buffering, or normalization, not many can truly picture what lies beyond these terms. That's why today I want to go into some more detail about them and do kind of a little tutorial. Let's get started. Technique number 1. Stratting and Memorization. In order to understand the upcoming techniques, we first need to discuss how I actually memorize my speedruns. Many people assume it is just muscle memory from years and years of practice, but that is absolutely not true. In fact, from scratch without any prior game knowledge, I finish most of my blindfolded runs within 1 or 2 months of practice. The most important parts of a blindfolded speedrun project are the preparation and the so-called stratting. For that, I make notes about basically every single input or setup that is needed in order to get from A to B. This creates these very long documents that you could basically just read out while playing, and you would have half a blindfolded run already. Having such a document will make the memorization process a lot more efficient and easier in the long run. For example, a strat document of one of my runs would usually look like this. Every room or bigger A to B movement of the game is written down in one line. I usually use abbreviations for movement options, like DR for down roll or UR for up roll, to make it more readable, and note down parts that need special attention in, for example, decision making. To further illustrate this process, let us strat a tiny section in The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time together. To traverse this first room, we have to get past some flying pots, push a boulder, and finally hit the switch on the ceiling with the hookshot while dodging the enemy's laser attacks. Then we need to go through the door. The written down blindfolded strat for this could look like this. We roll up until we reach the wall, bonk against it for confirmation, do 2 backflips, shield turn to the right, do a side hop into a neutral roll, hold up until we reach the boulder, position ourselves in the left corner, and then push it. After 11 pushes, we just hold up until we reach the wall, then perform 7 side hops to the left, then 1 to the right. Then we shield turn down right. Then we take the hook shot and aim up for the switch. If we don't hit it, tap a bit further. Once the camera turns during this cutscene, we just hold right until we reach the wall, then up and enter the door. With a setup like this, we can always just perform these few steps and will always with 100% consistency be able to get past this room. Now the problem is, contrary to many people's expectations, we cannot just rely on our often called godlike muscle memory or intuition. Imagine how difficult it would be running through a large game like Ocarina of Time without previously created strats. Especially random camera behavior from, for example, getting hit by an enemy can mess one up in blindfolded speedrunning very easily. On top of that, even information like, for example, press up for 3 seconds, then press A, cannot be used in our strats. These kind of information are very vague and could never be consistently executed. A little test. Have you ever tried to count perfectly to 10 without looking at the timer? Counting seconds in your head is not as precise as many people think it is, and relying on that in a multiple hour long blindfolded speedrun will never work out well. It can of course help in various scenarios, but that's basically why we also need the upcoming techniques. They will help us to create strats and setups that are way more consistent than just pure muscle memory or simple trial and error approaches. Technique number 2. Normalization. Normalization is one of the most important and frequently used blindfolded speedrunning techniques. There is not really a fixed definition for this term, but what it means in context of blindfolded speedruns is a fixed way to do the same action every time with the same result. We mostly differ between 2 main kinds of normalization: normalized movement and normalized positions. Normalized movement is movement or inputs that conserve normalization. That means a move in a game that always moves the character exactly X number of units away from the starting position. Some examples would be a backflip in SM64, side hops in Ocarina of Time, jumps in Metroid, duck jumps in Yoshi's Island, or dry rolls in Kingdom Hearts 1. Let us now take the example of Ocarina of Time again. When starting to route a new game, one of the first things you should do is check what normalized movement options you have. In Ocarina of Time, there are fortunately many normalized movement options, and even faster ones on top of that, which is always a great help for stratting and speedruns. We have obvious movement-related ones, like side hops, backflips, jump slashes, and so on, but also more subtle and precise ones, for aligning angles like shield turning, sword slashes, or quick spins. With all these techniques combined, we have a great toolset for movement and angle management. Now to normalized positions. These are positions in a game that we can identify with 100% confidence and use to locate our current position. Mostly, these are corners in rooms or special objects that you can get stuck on with distinguishable audio cues, like for example water or climbable walls. We could search for a normalized position in this room, then spin the camera around randomly and still be able to recover our position with that, in a way that we exactly know where we are. In this case, we use a setup containing side hops to the left and checking the wall in front of us to locate the normalized position of the climbable wall. This setup can be used from every single corner of the room. Through the distinguishable audio cue of climbing the wall, we know exactly where we are and can then continue with our other strats. While normalized movement is very useful and important, in a lot of cases it is only used for precise setups and actions like skips or glitches. This is because very often they are rather slow, and that's not really what we want in a speedrun. Technique number 3. Semi-normalized movement. To go faster while still being able to utilize consistent movement options, one can resort to semi-normalized movement. Most 3D games have something similar to this. It is a movement that is not 100% normalized, but close enough that it only changes very slightly over the course of its usage. Most of these movements vary in distance in correlation to the analog stick or a button press. That means, the longer you hold up or press a button during the movement, the further you will go. Here is a more detailed example in Nier Automata. You could reach the street in front of us with 8 normalized backdashes, as can be seen here. But you can also get a very similar result with only 5 semi-normalized dashes. This is of course a lot faster, but you lose some of the precision that normalized movements offer. Technique number 4. Sound and music cues. Sound and music cues can be two very powerful tools in blindfolded speedrunning. They can help you to identify positions of objects and enemies, indicate cycles, and much more. There is a slight difference between the two terms. While a sound cue is basically reacting to an in-game sound with an action, a music cue is reacting to a part of the in-game soundtrack with an action. Both are very similar, so I don't do a big distinction between them here, but what you should remember is, every music cue is also a sound cue, but not all sound cues are music cues. Here are a few examples. We could use the sound cue of the thwomp reaching the ground to time our backflip and reach the red coin. Another interesting case. We can also use the absence of an otherwise consistently playing sound cue, like the absence of the boss's footsteps to time a ground pound. An example for a music cue can be seen in Cool Cool Mountain. The first inputs of the speedrun strat are timed by the notes of the music. Technique number 5. Counting. As an extension to normal sound and music cues, the counting of consistently playing sound cues can be very useful for many kinds of different setups. This technique is rather self-explanatory, but it means counting how often a certain sound cue plays and according to that performs some action. It can help setting up precise tricks on moving objects and can also be used for fast movement. In many 2D games like Metroid Fusion, footsteps can be used for precise and fast movement and setting up tricks. Other sound cues like boss noises or damage sounds can also be used to count. Technique number 6. Beat counting. One of the most powerful techniques in blindfolded speedrunning is called beat counting. This means binding different inputs and actions to the beat of the background music. With that, one can create strings of inputs that can be played like a rhythm game. And in case you input everything perfectly, your strat will always work, you will always exactly know where you are, and you can do it fast on top of all that. It is also very useful if a stage or a game has cycles that need to be catched, since one can also include neutral waiting time in the beats. If you are wondering what I mean with beats, every song in this world has a certain BPM or beats per minute. Listen to this. You've probably heard a metronome in your life before. Basically, if we take some background music, we count all the ticks on the metronome for the given BPM of the song. Or in other words, you count the rhythm of the song in a consecutive manner. Of course, just like in music theory, for more precise inputs you can always count half and quarter beats, or even mix them all together in one input string. Let us take a look at the break the target stage of Samus. We can break down my strategy for this level into a single long beat string. This is the entire beat string for this stage. If you hit every beat correctly, you should be able to perfectly hit all the targets. If that was a bit too fast, try rewatching it with the YouTube slow motion settings. Technique number 7. Pseudo-Beatcounting. Now that we know about beat counting, what happens if there is no background music to beat count to, only very ambient BGM without any rhythm? There is something I personally call pseudo-beatcounting. It is similar to just counting seconds in your head with a constant 60 BPM rhythm, but you can vary the speed for the specific setup that is needed. What I do is, I write down a list of songs I have heard over and over again, for example from video games, movies, or just normal music. Those are songs I can recall in my head to such a degree that I can reliably sing or hum the tempo of them without them actually being played. For all of those songs, I then write down the corresponding BPM, and for example, if I have a setup that requires a 120 BPM count, I would beat count a song in my head with this specific value. This is of course not the most precise method, but it has proven to be very useful and better than just counting simple seconds. A specific example: the first rooms of IB have no background music or audio cues at all. What you could do in order to traverse these rooms safely is create a beat count string of let's say 120 BPM and use this to pseudo beat count your movement. For this room, you could do 9 beats to the left, 6 up, 1 left, and 4 down. There might be people who in this case might just use an actual metronome or some music in the background. But in my opinion, that is kind of outside help, and I personally would not like to use such methods in my runs. Technique number 8. Input buffering. Another extremely powerful technique in blindfolded speedrunning is called input or pause buffering. It is often used due to its nature to produce more reliable and precise results in terms of inputs. Many people often hear about blindfolded punch-out utilizing this technique a lot, but most blindfolded runs can take advantage of it. In 3D games, it especially helps with getting a better control of the analog stick. Let us take a closer look what it can do. Imagine the scenario that we want to go from a neutral stick position directly left. Normally, you would just press left and notch the analog stick, but in some very precise setups that might not be enough. Because the analog stick has a short traveling time between the neutral position and the notch, you can get different results in movement based on how fast you move the stick into the left side. We can solve this problem with a buffered input though. If you buffer the left input with, for example, a pause, you can go directly from the neutral position to the left notch without the game recognizing the weird in-between room. But what does it mean to buffer something with a pause? It means that we go into a pause screen of the game with our initial analog stick state, then input the desired position correctly, and afterwards unpause again. Dependent on the game that you play, there might be other methods too though. Some moves might buffer inputs naturally, like for example the crouch in Super Mario 64. Technique number 9. Echolocation. Echolocation is a technique to determine the location of objects using reflected sound. It is mostly only used for very specific setups or backups, since it is not very normalized and very difficult to reliably set up in a fast way. One usage that is very often used in blindfolded speedruns is echolocating walls. Let us take a look at 2 examples. In Metroid Fusion, you can echolocate walls using missiles. Depending on the speed of the explosion, you can deduct the distance between the character and the wall, and thus figure out your position in the room. Another example would be The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, where you can echolocate walls with items like the hookshot. If you get lost, like demonstrated in this clip with a random camera angle, you can figure out the way to a normalized position again, and then continue your usual or your backup strat from there. Technique number 10. Camera management. This last one is not really a technique, but I think it might be worth discussing here too. There are 2 main camera modes in most video games: dynamic and static cameras. Dynamic camera means that the camera is following your character around. If you, for example, press right to move your character, the camera will also turn to the right a tiny bit. Or if you run against a wall, the camera might try to pan around so you can see again. Static camera, on the other hand, means that the camera is fixed and will always point into the same direction, independent of your inputs. For blindfolded speedrunning, I can with all of my heart recommend that you first check if your game has a static camera setting. It will make stratting and running the game much easier in the long run. A dynamic camera does not mean a game is impossible to blindfold though. You just need to adjust your strats accordingly and consider the movement of the camera in every single one of your sideway movements. In both camera scenarios, a button that resets the camera behind your character is also always a great tool for setups. With a dynamic camera, it might be one of the only ways to get a normalized camera angle, and with that you can create setups way easier. You could, for example, buffer a diagonal notch input, go neutral, and then reset the camera. From here on, you could just hold up without affecting the dynamic camera anymore. These were 10 techniques I use in most of my blindfolded speedruns. I hope it was understandable and you could learn something new today. If you are curious and want to try to speedrun a game blindfolded yourself, feel free to write a comment or contact me through some other way listed in the description. We also have a community that is focused on blindfolded gaming, and we are all very happy to help newcomers out, so don't be hesitant to ask us any questions. If you like this type of YouTube content, I would really appreciate if you leave a like and subscribe to my channel. I will continue to produce videos about blindfolded speedrunning, so stay tuned. Thank you all very much and see you next time.